Ancient Roman versus Greek army, which was better? I mean, the Romans, but then again, let's see what they say. I'm interested to see how they're going to defend it, because it's an hour video, which we're not going to watch. We'll only watch a little bit, but then again, they did speak for an hour. They have got 2 helmets here, a brass reproduction of a Corinthian helmet, and then they've got a Imperial Gallic type H. It's actually the exact same helmet that I have. This is like $100 and this is 150 probably. So this is very cheap, made in India helmets. It's not like they're great representations. But then again, their Gallic is okay. You know, this is fine. They've got much worse ones. The Gallic Type H is probably one of their best. So it's cheap, but it's not too bad. You can reenact with this. This one, I'm not a huge fan. I used to own one and then I just gave it to someone who wanted it because, as I say, there are better recreations, but it's fine for the purposes of the video.
Is this, see if it fits my oversized head. Nope. I gotta have some padding in here.
You do?
That's the main problem with the Greek helmet.
You just can't see
They're
anything.
all just too big. Hello, I'm Tristan Hughes. I'm the host of the Ancients podcast.
Hello.
And here for another YouTube video. Today I'm joined by my good friend and YouTube sensation, Dr. Ditch. No, sorry,
Sensation.
Dr. Rule Canine-a-Dyke. Rule, how are you?
I'm well, thanks. Great to be here.
Yeah, and this is interesting. It's a completely new format. We are the test dummies for it, but it's a head-to-head history round, and it's the Roman legionary soldier versus the Greek hoplite. Are you ready?
Yes, let's go.
I'm ready.
Let's do it.
I've picked it up. Would you like to talk first of all about the weapons of a classical Greek hoplite?
Yeah.
Of course. So the classical Greek hoplite is kind of an iconic figure. I mean, you've probably all seen the image. The hoplite here, I mean, this is basically the fully armored hoplite figure that you get. So he's got a long spear. He's got a big round shield. That's a double grip shield. So he's got his arm stuck into an elbow grip.
Man, look at that system with the connection here. You put it actually looks pretty comfortable, because I mean, it is heavy. To be fair, it really is heavy.
It's about sort of 90 centimeters in diameter. And you have to imagine as well, like, these people are not like my extreme Dutch height, but like, you know, they would have been covered very significantly by a shield of that size. And then their offensive weapons, they are this very long spear, which, you know, it varied in length. It didn't have a standard length. It's not like they sort of took out a tape measure and said, this is how long it's going to be. Somewhere between 2 meters and maybe 3, maybe even a little bit more.
Yeah. And do they hold it like 3/4 of the way down the shaft? Is that the usual? Or?
Yeah, so what you're seeing in this image is pretty much the idea. So it's balanced towards the rear, which is what the counterweight helps to.
Exactly, yeah, the bronze counterweight. Man, that is such a genius idea, by the way. The Greeks, much respect to the Greeks for that, because this way you don't have to hold it in the middle. You can hold it here. It's a bit like when you have a sword, right? Swords are usually balanced depending on the sword, but in general, swords are balanced more towards the hilt, which allows you to use them more nimbly, whereas like a mace, a warhammer, they're more balanced towards the end, so you can strike, you know, really make it count, but it makes them a bit unwieldy in comparison. So basically that's what they're doing here, and I absolutely love it. This is Roel Canine-a-Dyke. I have reviewed his work before. Occasionally we disagree, but he's a fantastic historian and definitely shines when talking about ancient Greece more than Rome. In fact, a lot of my disagreements with him had to do with some things he said about Rome. But when it comes to Greece, yeah, the guy's really good.
To achieve. So this little thing here is called sarrater, sometimes a lizarder or lizard killer, because you presumably, because you stab it in the ground, sometimes something gets caught in there. But fundamentally, it moves the point of balance further to the rear, which means that you have more reach to the front, basically. You can use more of that shaft to stab ahead of you rather than having to balance it in the middle. And then the other weapon that they carry is a short sword, which you can see sort of tucked away here in the shield. There are two main types they use. One is the siphos, which is a sort of straight leaf-shaped sword, very similar to the Roman one. And the other is called kopis or makaira, which is more of a sort of axe dressed up as a sword. It's a slashing weapon, yeah. It's a recurved saber, so it leans forward, has most of its weight towards the tip. It's a very heavy weapon. It was prized for fighting on horseback because you can slash down with it very easily, but also in infantry combat it's very, very effective. It puts a lot of weight towards the tip of the blade, so you can crash through armor, you can break helmets, things like that.
I mean, that's a two-edged.
Okay, so a few things to say about that. I wanted to let him finish so that I don't interrupt too much, but there are a few things I would like to say. And this is me being a little pedantic, guys, but that's me. That's why you subscribed, so now don't complain. To me, this is not a short sword. Look at this beast. I know that That's how we call them. The gladius is a short sword, or at least that's how people call them. I don't. I stopped doing that because I was repeating that over and over again. And then I thought for a moment, and I'm like, well, a gladius is literally the length of my entire arm from the tip of my fingers all the way up to my shoulder. How is that short? And even this, it's a beast of a sword. The reason why we call them short, and again, I'm being pedantic, so it's not a disagreement, but it's like a food for thought. Let's put it this way. The reason why we call them short is because we think of medieval weapons. So clearly, if you look at, for instance, a medieval longsword, but even the average bastard sword or arming sword, yeah, they are a lot longer. That's due to the materials, among other things. So that's why we call them short swords. But they didn't have access to the Middle Ages, obviously, because they happened before. So from the perspective of classical antiquity, this is just a sword. And that's the length of a sword. Now, that length varies. The Pompey gladius tends to be a little shorter than the Mainz gladius, for instance. But in general, no one in classical antiquity would have ever considered this monster to be a short sword. So at the end of the day, I kind of stopped calling them short. I don't think they're short unless you compare them with an actual medieval sword, which puts 1,000 years of difference sometimes, depending on what era we're talking. And so, yeah, no, I don't like calling them short. It's not wrong, but it's just one of those things, it's just, yeah. Anyways, I mean, at the end of the day, a long sword is going to be short compared to a pike, but it's not like I'm going to call it short. So that's kind of the idea that I wanted to provide. The other thing, the other nitpick that I had is this. To me, this is not an axe dressed as a sword, like you mentioned. And again, I am being pedantic. The reason being, though, is that this is something that we said, and I said too, because again, we repeat stuff. So when you look at something such as the falchion, people say it's a sword, but it behaves like an axe. The reality is that they don't. The only point in common that they have with an axe is, yes, they are top heavy, but it's still a sword. So the way you use it, you wouldn't really use an axe to intercept and parry the same way you would with a sword. With this, you can still parry a lot more easily than with an axe. It's just the way it functions is different. So yeah, that's pedantic me, and that's what we're here for. But anyways, I'm not necessarily disagreeing. He also mentioned that they could have used these to break helmets. Possible, actually. I don't think it would be like the intended use. I think the intended use, from the perspective of the ancients, would be to cut people in pieces. However, if you do hit a helmet, and the helmet that you hit is copper, bronze, brass, you could dent it. That could happen. I've actually tested it myself. I just don't think it was an intended purpose. It's just something that could happen.
It was prized for fighting on horseback because you can slash down with it very easily, but also in infantry combat it's very, very effective. It puts a lot of weight towards the tip of the blade, so you can crash through armor, you can break helmets, things like that.
I don't think you can crush through armor. I disagree. That's the only time where I actually disagreed. Up to this point, I was just being pedantic. But I do disagree that you can crash through armor just because you've got the weight towards the business end. It doesn't sound real. Who knows? Maybe he's right.
I mean, that's a two-edged sword as well, isn't it?
That's
so
right.
It can slash either way or stab.
Is it?
So the Sifos is for stabbing and slashing and, whatever you want to do with it. It's quite short, but it does have the two edges, whereas the Kopis or Machaira has only a single edge.
Exactly, yeah.
Right, well, moving on to the classic Roman legionary, and I believe I've got one here, absolutely, yes. The classic image you do have of a Roman legionary soldier from the early imperial period, so from about like kind of 1 AD, 1 CE, kind of that area, just before, all the way for the next couple of centuries or so. But the main weapon, I mean, let's talk about the sword first of all, because that's the weapon you think of first and foremost. The short stabbing sword, which you can see on the side here.
You see, everyone calls them short. I just, now that I made you notice this, you will be reminded every single time of my voice in your head. Every time someone says it, you will think of me.
It's not a short sword, you muppet.
That's what you're going to be reminded of. I kind of ruined it for you. That object's been ceremonial when archaeologists haven't got an absolute clue what the object was used for. They always call it ceremonial. And the third thing is when they're either lazy or they just don't know what the material is, they'll say copper alloy. And I'm like, but can you tell me if it's brass? Can you tell me if it's bronze? If it is bronze, can you tell me what type of bronze? Is it tin bronze? Is it arsenical bronze? No, I've read entire books filled with copper alloy, copper alloy, copper alloy, copper alloy. Well, thank you.
In a lovely little scabbard as well. I'll talk about the scabbard in a bit later too.
Yeah, let's talk about the scabbard.
Short stabbing sword called a gladius. Now, earlier than the imperial period, the Roman legionary soldiers still did have like a short stabbing sword, but it was a bit longer. It gets a bit shorter by this time. And there are various different styles or different patterns to the gladius. So overall, it kind of retained the same purpose, like mainly for thrusting and stabbing, but you get different patterns. Like there's the Mainz pattern blade, which is kind of, it gets narrower in the middle and then bulges out and then into kind of a triangular tip. But then you get ones like the Pompey style blade, which is more kind of parallel all the way. But that was the main weapon of each Roman legionary soldier. Of course, we must also mention, though, the javelin, the pilum, which is also the thing that is very associated with a Roman legionary soldier, but there's also a lot of debate.
Since he mentioned the scabbard, we always do this because priorities, guys. Let's learn all together the Latin word for scabbard. 3, 2, 1. Boom. That's the Latin word for scabbard. Just so you know, write it down. I don't think you need to write it down, to be honest. Yeah. Let's study Latin with Metatron. Your first word in Latin is scabbard. Just so you know. That's it. Might have to do with the sword going in the scabbard and whatnot. I don't know if there is double entendre. But that's the word. That's the word. Do remember classical pronunciation. The V is a W and the G is a G. So pronunciation is a little different. You would pronounce this vagina, but you know what I mean. Pronounce it however you want. I don't judge. Let's get back to the video. Thank you very much, man. Learning Latin with Metatron. I dare you to forget it. Thank you very much.
Around so many different parts of the Roman pilum. I mean, how many did a Roman legionary have? Was it 1? Was it 2? Some even argue that they may have had 3 javelins at 2.
Never heard of that.
Did it bend in the middle when it struck an enemy? And another one regarding, I mean, were there differences in the design? But the Roman javelin was used by Roman legionary normally at the start of a battle before engaging in close combat. And it's designed, you have the long wooden shaft, then you have this iron shank, and then you have this kind of diamond-shaped tip. Both of those main weapons, I mean, psychologically on the battlefield, they were terrifying for an enemy.
It's worth saying about the pilum actually that compared to other javelins of the ancient world, it's really quite a heavy and very carefully designed weapon. Like most javelins in antiquity are basically just a stick with a small sort of metal point. It doesn't have the same counterweight. It doesn't have that whole mechanism of a long iron shaft that's sort of locked into it. So this is built for a specific purpose, which has been speculated about. The ancient authors will say that it's because...
I wonder who that is. Alexander the Great? Waiting for us? Maybe he never died, guys. He's here. Look, we've got a hand.
Of this attempt to kind of get stuck in someone's armor, disable shields, things like that. We don't really know, but like Greeks obviously also used javelins, infantry and cavalry both. But they were of a much simpler design. They did have a throwing loop to sort of go further and fly more accurately. But otherwise they didn't have this kind of level of design to try and fit a specific role on the battlefield. So they're really just much more like...
Specific role, Kanindike.
Go see what you can do with it.
I mean, and it's a really interesting design, and we've been saying we're using the word javelin quite a lot for the pilum, but we should also stress that actually, like if a Roman soldier was in a bit of a pinch, they could use the pilum as a spear. It gives you a bit extra reach as well, so kind of like the Greek hoplite. So it could be used, but usually when we hear about the pilum being used, it's at the start of the battle, it's being thrown, and then the Romans will charge in with their large scutum shield and their sword, their gladius sword, and kind of basically be a battering ram of kind of moving forwards, hitting them with the boss of the shield, then stabbing with the gladius, moving forwards, in that kind of battering ram motion. One thing you can't see on this image would be the other kind.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, even though the pilum is not the best spear for hand-to-hand combat, it's because it's designed to be thrown. Still, if you stab someone in the eye, it's not like it's not going to work. So, I mean, there is that.
Kind of melee weapon that they would be using, which would be a pugio dagger, so it's much smaller than the gladius, but kind of similar in the design that, you know, kind of have that triangular tip. And with the gladius, it was designed, it didn't need to go deep into an enemy, but of course horrific wounds, hemorrhaging. It was another psychologically terrifying weapon, and I think there's...
Oh no, don't use the psychological, the terrifying weapon, because you remind me of Simon Whistler. I don't want, Simon Elliott, and I don't want to be reminded of them. Still, to be pedantic, because that's why you're here, this much penetration for the Pugio, I think it's deep. to be honest. Because literally, if you stab and the guys go no armor, as it often is the case when it comes to the enemies of Rome, exception being the Carthaginians and the Greeks, but in general, imagine the guy has no armor. You manage to stab that much, you can literally stab, go through the heart, through the rib cage, and go. Yeah, that's just deep enough. Man, imagine the ice pick grip with the Pugio. Yeah, no, yeah, that will do the job.
Also, examples of legionaries going into battle in special cases with their Pugios. In assassination of Julius Caesar, those assassins, you can imagine them smuggling in, kind of hiding Pugios in their togas, and that's how they did away with Julius Caesar. And I guess you could say the scutum shield, although we see it as armour.
Roll seemed very happy to think about the stabbing of Julius Caesar. We need to examine this, a little bit of body language analysis here. Why is he so happy about Julius Caesar being stabbed to death? I don't know, man. And where is the hand? Where did he go? Where is the... Oh, that's why he's smiling. Because the guy went away. Alexander the Great, he knows. He knows.
Caesar. And I guess you could say the scutum shield, although we see it as armour, it is also a weapon in its own right, like I guess the hoplite shield, because it has this big iron boss in the middle that, you know, if you hit an enemy with it, you could break their nose. It's got iron and some of the rims of the curved rectangular shield as well, that if you hit an enemy's foot with it as well, it could cause big damage.
Can't do that with a hoplite shield. It just won't go that far.
But can the hoplite shield, can it also be used like as an offensive?
You absolutely would use it that way. I mean, it's always depicted that way. I mean, hoplites are always depicted essentially protecting themselves by raising this thing up to make a sort of glasses, right? To make a sort of slanted armor. But obviously, you can try to use that also to try and do a shield bash, I guess, with the side. But this is...
I would like to explain, to say one thing now, because I always hear it's mostly historians. I occasionally reenactors, but it's mostly historians that tell you, oh, and you can use the scutum to hit someone in the nose. Yeah, and you can use the Greek shield as well to hit someone in the face. Yeah, and you can use this Kermit the Frog book to smack someone in the face. And you can use this iPhone to smack someone in the head. And you can use this Xbox controller. You hold it like this, right? This is going to be the business end. You take your nice swing. Wait, I need to demonstrate. You take a nice swing. You tell them, hey, look, Julius Caesar. Then they turn around, boom, smack them with this right in the temple. So yeah, I would like to underline to all historians out there, that you can use any solid object as a weapon. It's not the discovery that oftentimes people, and it's not even them, I have nothing against them, man, but I've heard people telling it like they had rediscovered the wheel. They're like, oh, you could use the shield to smack someone in the face. And you could use the floppy disk from my Amiga 500 to smack someone in the face. Probably not very effective, but the level of effectiveness of that smacking in the head will be proportional to the growth in size and weight of the object that you're using to smack them in the said face.
Something that's debated among reenactors, because some of them have tried it. They say you can't do it. Others will say, oh, you're too tight in this formation to be able to use that effectively. It is much more of a defensive weapon, I think, than the scutum, which has this sort of attested sort of practice of being used as a way to fight, as a way to drive the enemy.
It's two different kind of uses of weapons, isn't it? I mean, there's no getting away from, I mean, the Roman imperial soldier, a most feared unit, I would say at the time, on the military battlefield. But
unless they meet an elephant. Yeah.
Unless they, well, yes, exactly. But I mean, what would you say about it? It's two different types of weapons, main weapons, whereas the Roman legion soldier is using a sword, which feels quite different to so many years previously in ancient warfare, where the spear is the main weapon of choice.
The spear is king, right? That's the kind of idea that you get. And it's important to note, as you say, about the psychology of facing these weapons, of encountering them. I mean, they have the expression, obviously, we take conquered by the sword. Their phrase is aikmalotos, conquered by the spear. Right? Taken by the spear is their expression for conquest. So the spear is the sort of iconic weapon that you would use. And when they talk about the danger of battle, metaphorically, they can talk about a storm of spears. They can talk about what you do in battle is face the spears. That is essentially the function of an infantryman. And so in that sense, like, the psychology of it is really all deciding. It's like, which weapon do you think is the most sort of awe-inspiring, essentially? Which weapon?
Yeah, no, I like, as I say, I do like Roll Canine, and it's the way he explores and goes deeper. When it comes to the psychology of combat in classical antiquity, rather than focusing on, oh, this is a terror weapon, they say that of the longbow, the terror weapon of the Middle Ages. Fine, it's a fine point. I'm not going to disagree with it. I am more interested, however, in reading those sources that we have from ancient Greece and from ancient Rome that deal actually with the psychological responses that soldiers had before the clash of battle. That, when we actually discuss psychology of combat, is what really interests me the most. And there are some sources that mention, for instance, that right before fighting into battle, the young men in fact, but the men that were hoplites in ancient Greece would bite their lips. We are told about that. They would rub their heels sometimes. So imagine that you're standing, maybe you lift a little bit with your right leg and start rubbing the back of your heel against your calf. That's described in the sources. And these are physical responses to obviously anxiety, and they are self-soothing behaviors, and they can be studied psychologically, and it really creates a connection, because often when we imagine them, we imagine these battle-hardened tough guys, which they were. I mean, particularly if compared to the likes of me and regular people that have an everyday life and whatever, but they were still humans, and a lot of them were young. So yes, we have this exact descriptions of the type of fidgeting and fiddling that clearly are showing a response to stress, and it's in the sources. So when we talk about the psychology of combat, that's what I'm more interested in, rather than thinking, oh, the bow is a terror weapon, the spear is a terror weapon. Yeah, every weapon is a terror weapon. It's not like being smacked in the forehead with a mace is less terrifying than being stabbed with a spear. But I'm not disagreeing. I'm just saying, just wanted to add, since the idea of psychology in combat was mentioned, then we do have sources. Obviously, he's 100% aware of it since he's a professional, and they tell us about it, and it's fascinating. It's a way to counter cognitive load of the moment before the clash with your enemy.
And do you think of as the default? If you were to grab any weapon and fight, what is it that you go for? In the Greek mind, this is absolutely going to be these long spears, because that is how you can inflict terrible wounds while staying at a safe distance.
But that is also the thing. I remember talking to a reenactor, but also someone who works at the Calcrease Museum in Germany, the Warschlacht Museum, where it's theorized, and a lot of evidence for it, that was one of the battles of the Battle of the Teutoburg Forest. And he was talking about the use of potentially keeping one of your pilums back, not throwing them all, because you have that more distance. And I guess there is still that mindset of keeping distance, but at the same time, it's a different psychological mindset to a Roman legionary soldier.
Yeah, I mean, the problem is always, like, reenactors are always trying to figure out, what's the best weapon, what's the most effective way of using it. And obviously there's a whole sort of YouTube discourse about this kind of thing where they try and test it out.
Here I am.
The thing is, ancient sources don't talk about it that way, right? They don't necessarily care about what happens in one-to-one fights, because that's not how you win battles. Right. You win battles by overwhelming the enemy's psychological resistance, essentially, their willingness to stay in that fight. And so it is, in a sense, a lot more important to be scary than to be sort of the most effective or the optimized warrior. And in that sense, I do think that, first the Macedonian pike phalanx, and then later the Roman legionary, they had an edge over many of their enemies because they were in a way terrifying.
That's when we talk about.
I would like to add to that. This is one of the components that now the historian is mentioning, of people who are scared of you. For instance, the Mongols, we know, who used a lot of that sort of psychological tactic. Your ability to be effective in hand-to-hand combat as a unit. I mean, the Romans trained like maniacs, so that had to have been also extremely central from the perspective of a Roman, not just looking scary. In fact, to me, that's more important than looking scary. I would put it an edge above. Professional warrior soldiers that know that drill, that fight a lot, that have a physique coming from training, swimming. That's what the sources suggest to me. I agree with him, not necessarily one-to-one. You want them to be able to be effective as a cohesive unit, so I do agree with him partially. This idea you gotta look scary, though, yeah, it's part of it. I just wouldn't put it that high. It's just one extra brick as we build a wall of success and effectiveness in combat. But when it comes to the Roman, it's not just that. It's also the incredible professional tacticians, the legati, the generals, the overall professionalism of the armies, which was one of the main differences between Rome and Greece, is that Rome was more professional. And Rome was more professional than anything up until the modern period, by the way. The Roman legions were less technologically advanced than medieval armies, but they were more professional. And last but not least, the Romans had logistics and a massive economic backbone that also supported the armies. They could field more men. They could go in a lot of different places. They were very well coordinated. There is a lot that goes into why the Romans were so effective. There's a lot of things.